Jessica LaRusso from Workplace Education Manitoba today, and I'm your host and support for this webinar titled Tuesday Tidbits. Before I introduce our instructor, I just want to go over some features. On the top of your screen, you'll see three icons: a smile emoji, a question mark, and a telephone. The smile emoji will open up a variety of expressions. The question mark in the blue box is where you will ask questions. And if there's time, we'll be able to answer them at the end of the webinar or give you feedback. And the telephone is there if you need to switch to the telephone. Next, there is a chat box available, which I put 2 support links in, as well as my email address and telephone number to text. Now, the people who are on the telephone today, the text number for support is 204-770-4864. I'll be checking my telephone and email often to see whether you need support or not. On top of that, the instructor may ask you for feedback, and the chat box is where you're going to answer. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and introduce our instructor, Rochelle Amy. Rochelle Amy has been with education and has a professional career in education since the year 2000. She's taught from kindergarten to grade 12, university, and adult education. And she's focused on the growth of her students. She's an amazing instructor in essential skills and has been with Workplace Education Manitoba since 2019 and now works at the Interlake West Centre. Please, with a smile emoji, give her a round of applause. And Rochelle Amy, I'm so excited to learn from you today, and you have the screen. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We are so glad you're here, and applause right back to you. I'm so thankful you could join us this morning. Not sure where you're tuning in from in Manitoba. I'm coming to you from the Interlake, Selkirk area, and here it's a nice overcast, and maybe we'll get a little bit of much needed rain for our neighborhood here. So hopefully it's nice in the neck of the woods you're in. Of course, you know that today's Tidbits brought to you by Workplace Education Manitoba, the place where we develop essential skills, or help people develop those skills that are needed for their workplace, their learning, and their life skills. And of course, we do receive funding. We're grateful for it, and so we want to take a moment and just thank our funders for that, specifically ERSDC and Manitoba Education and Training, who helped develop this curriculum. And we're grateful that we get to do this together. So we want to dive in and talk about trust today. And trust is an interesting one because we often go to think of one person or one scenario when we're imagining what it is that trust looks like. And there's a fascinating book out that deals with the speed of trust, and it really brings in the concept that trust is a lot like throwing that rock or that pebble into the pond, where it hits a spot and then the ripples move out afterward. So often and usually trust would begin with you as that stone, as it were, and then the ripple effect moving out past you to other people, to your organization, and ultimately to the world at large. That book I was referring to is written by Stephen Covey, and it's called The Speed of Trust. And I encourage you to grab a copy of that and take a read through. It's interesting because it takes people through a lot of personal management and building trust in relationships. And then it also helps you look at the lens of trust for your own company. And what's fascinating is it all starts in the same place, no matter what position you're in, no matter what level of leadership, no matter how much influence you think you have in your company, it always comes down to building the trust with the self-trust first. And that first drop in the water, that first ripple that revolves around what you've created in your own self-trust is a critical piece. And this one, one of the best ways to measure this is looking at whether or not you're the kind of person who's on time. So if you give your word that you're going to be somewhere on time, you start developing a trust with your own self. So we often think that showing up on time impacts other people, but actually it develops a level of trust with yourself that you build a confidence that even your own words are trustworthy. And when you create that with different habits and practices and character and virtue, when you establish that in your life, what ends up happening is a next wave comes out where trust gets built outside of you. So you might have built trust with yourself in certain areas, and we're all good, stronger and weaker in different areas, but we have those places of trust with ourselves. And then the first place that ripples out to is it touches the relationships around us. So it touches our friends and family, it touches our coworkers, it touches strangers, it touches anyone we're interacting with where there's a need to have any measure of credibility or amicability. And when we've built that trust in the relationships around us, something happens in our companies. And it's phenomenal because you see that relational trust that comes from that first place of being able to trust yourself and establish routines and habits and commitments that build trust with yourself and then with your teammates actually works out towards the broader organization. So then there's an ability within your organization to have a well-established trust. And in some cases, that's known by uniform, right? If you're in McDonald's or if you're a firefighter, you know when you see your colleague in that uniform what that means. I know there's a lot of firefighters, for example, who get a tattoo on them of the certain firefighter symbol. And then no matter what city they're in, they're recognized by their brothers in uniform, as it were, that they're a part of that brotherhood of firefighters. And so there can be this component of organizational trust that gets built as that third ripple in establishing trust. And when we're successful in doing that, we actually get to impact the market at large. So we move outside of our doors now. It's not just internally. We have good communication and strong trust with the people we work with, and our teams work well together, and our different branches in different cities work well together. But we actually establish ourselves on the market, that brand becomes something that people can trust. You know that if you going back to the McDonald's example, you know that if you order a cheeseburger, that cheeseburger is going to be exactly the same at every McDonald's, and it's basically never going to be screwed up. There's a certain market trust that comes with certain brands, and those don't just come because that cheeseburger tasted good. They don't come that way. They come because of the people that built that up. So people who were trustworthy, who established good team relationships, made the organization trustable internally, and then externally created that in the market itself. And if you're really successful at establishing trust and you have a proven track record and time goes by, time's a key piece of this too, you know, it's not just establishing trust for a short term, but really staying the course with it, you actually impact society. So that furthest ripple that's there, that's saying, hey, I even want to help impact the world around me in a positive way. There's a difference in what motivates people. People will almost do anything for a leader that they trust. They will go beyond just their job description. They'll go beyond just their hours. Instead of having their coat on at 4:29 and ready to walk out the door, they're at 4:31 still engaged with what needs to happen because they know that the leader values them and has created a relationship that does not abuse that relational trust that they have as coworkers. But when we're working with people that we don't trust, we get the will only. It's like, I'll do that. I'll do the bare minimum just to make this conversation ends. But I'm not really going to go above and beyond. I'm not going to engage problem solving. And more importantly, I'm not going to take on any risk because I don't know if it's worth it, and I don't know if you would have my back with it either. So we end up, when we create trust, we end up creating this asset in our company that actually is not measured on the books in any way. We end up with a social capital, and it becomes almost more valuable than the building that you're in or the human resource assets that you could count. When you end up with this social capital, you've probably felt this, right? Have you ever been in a store or a workplace where when you're in there, you're like, I'm just feeling the love. I'm feeling the positive vibe. I want to tell you about a story. I went, this was a few years ago now. I was at a tournament, a sports tournament in the US. And so I was at this hockey rink all the time. And I would be in and out, and next door to it was this store that I had never heard of. And it turns out it was like a clothing and housewares department store kind of thing. And I just would notice people coming out of the store looking happy. They all had bags. And if they were coming out in groups of 2s or 3s, they just all looked happy. And it was like after 3 days of seeing this, I said to my travel companions, I'm like, you know what? I've never heard of that store, but I'm going in there because everyone who walks out of that place looks so happy. It's so bizarre. And so I went in the store and poked around, and sure enough, I discovered they had social capital in there. They had such a high level of trust. These employees were so collegial with each other, so positive. It wasn't an atmosphere of loud music and everybody just being fake cheery. It wasn't that. It was that these people loved this place. And if something fell off the rack, like it was almost a scramble of who could get there first. And you could see, hey, they must get paid well, or they must love each other's company, because the social capital they had in that group actually gave their store, which I had never heard of before, and it's so obscure and hardly ever known, it became the place to shop in that community. So do not underestimate what social capital can do, and having that trust in teams. It's phenomenal how it can impact your agency and your clients. Now, this is an interesting one to just sort of look in the mirror. It's easy to answer the first question. Do you trust your leader? And I'd say that's often a 50-50 split. I don't want you to answer on this screen because maybe you're watching this with your boss. It's so easy to decide, do I trust my leader? Yes or no. And I probably trust them based on something that happened in the last 5 business days. But the harder question to answer is, are you a trustworthy leader? Because see, remember, where did the trust ripples start? They don't start in the organization. They don't start in the market. They start with the self. And if you don't have the trustworthy confidence in yourself, you're certainly not going to have it in a leader. And this is a great question for you just to reflect on in your own time. You know, take just a couple minutes after this session together at 10:30 when we end and answer these 2 questions. This one here, what separates great leaders from just good ones? And what makes a person credible? Credible with whichever clients you have, whether they're internal clients or external. What actually adds to the credibility of that? And the best way to answer that is to think of the ones who you think are the most credible and figure out what is it about them that's different. And again, takes a little bit of mining, because often we see the outward things about the market trust, and we forget to look really deep into who's the individual and what are their trust characteristics that they established with that very first ripple of self. When we picture a high trust leader, it always comes down to personal credibility. Without the personal credibility at the beginning, there's nowhere to grow from there. From that personal credibility, we also can realize that the high trust leader, they know how to grow trust with others. So they not only have their own personal credibility, but they have credibility on their interpersonal interpersonal skills. And interpersonal skills are not intuitive. They must be learned, and they must be learned and adapted depending on the workplace that you're in. I was just speaking with someone the other day who's switching industries. It's a young woman who's been in the construction industry for a number of years, and she's switching to do something totally different. And she's learning right away that as she leaves the hands-on construction field where it was really tough work, really rigorous demands with a crew, the interpersonal communication style and skills that are needed there to thrive are totally a different set of skills than what's needed in an office setting. So being able to grow your trust as a leader or as a coworker means you've also been intentional and grown your interpersonal skills to suit the environment you're in. And then from there, you can extend that trust further to the organization. These high trust leaders, they've learned to interact in ways that do not raise blood pressure. They know what the pitfalls are, and they know that about themselves. So they know, my resting face tends to look really negative or mad. And so I have to make a conscious effort when I'm with my coworkers to be mindful. What does my resting face look like? Because I don't want to waste time with all of those things that erode trust. I want to take some onus on myself so that I can build the trust. When we take a real good look at ourselves and do some self-assessment, it comes back to that first ripple every time. You can't change the world and be on that fifth wave of trust without getting the first one right. And so we're quick to point out what the leader's doing wrong. We wish this person would do this or that company would do that. And we want other people to take ownership of the things that rub us the wrong way. And yet on this side of it, is what you see actually what is? Do you have a perception about yourself, your attitudes, your actions, and your credibility, your habits, your track record, the way you build trust? Is it true to who you are and what your best practices are? What I love about Covey's book about the speed of trust is he actually can point you towards profitability. So if you want to increase profitability in your company, trust is your bottom line. A lot of times people think increasing profitability would be about cutting costs or raising sales prices. And yet he challenges companies to say nothing costs you more than a lack of trust in your organization. Your definition of it, my definition of it, there would be some common denominators. But again, remember, you're thinking about who are your internal stakeholders and your external ones, and what would trust look like to those people? In the dictionary, it's pretty straightforward. It's the assured reliance on character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. It's someone in which confidence is placed. And when it's placed there, there's two components of it. The first one is the feeling part. Often this is someone's gut reaction, their visceral reaction to something that they're seeing and experiencing, where they just know, I know the track record, I have confidence in what I'm experiencing. And it's also the confidence based on one's character or their competence. So sometimes you can pull off all of the nonverbal things, all the things that are not specific track record things, and you can glean off of that to gain trust. And other times you point right to the competence, right to the character, right to the credibility. And usually those things have to go together. You need both parts of it. You can't just feel good about someone or feel good about your track record and then have no proof for it. And if you wonder, do we have that in our team? Does my team feel trust in me as a contributor, as a coworker? Well, their active feeling would be that they have a feeling of trust, that they just know in their gut that they can articulate why they trust you and what your character's about. If they have a passive feeling of trust, they're not worried when you say something. They don't look at you sideways and raise one eyebrow. They don't run to the coffee break room to try to dissect, what did you mean by that? So those active and passive ways of understanding trust are very real in the workplace. And the suspicion piece is probably your biggest dragon that you have to slay in your workplace. It's like, what's that person's motive? What do they really mean by that? And did you see how they did that? Do you remember the last time we put them on that project? And so overcoming those things to a place of confidence has the ability to seriously impact your organizational's impact on the market and on society. Recognizing that trust is really a transaction, it has to be built bit by bit by bit. And when I mean bit, I mean bit. Trust is usually in the tiniest pieces. It's not usually built one cake at a time. It's built one bite of the cake at a time. And it always begins with you trusting yourself enough to know what you could put out there so that others could trust you too. When we boil it down to what does that need to look like in me, jot down these words: character and competence. It's funny, if we ever apply for a job, right at the beginning, in the application stage on the resume, this is what we try to show. People try to get you to articulate your character, right? They say, you know, are you trustworthy? Give us examples of that. They phone for references. What's this person like? And then we try to show our competence. Here's all the things I did. Here's how you know I've progressed in my career and what my skills are. And if you only presented one of these two in that initial conversation where you're trying to land the job, you probably won't land it, because it's really takes the two pieces of bread to make the sandwich. You need to show the trust that they want to have you on their team because you have both the character and the competence. It can be easy to focus on the competence, but the character is absolutely, unequivocally the foundation of what you're doing. The character first boils down to integrity, and I love the saying one person taught me once, you know, integrity is what you do when no one's looking. And only you know if you have the personal integrity that's needed for your workplace, your relationships, and your life. You have to measure it when you look in the mirror. Do you put out there the right things when no one's looking, or do you only put it on when someone's looking and can give you a pat on the back? That's a true test of character. Another test in your own self-trust and your own character is looking at what your intent is. So intent sort of breaks out into three pieces, and we're always trying to read each other's intent, and we often get stuck on motive. Why are you actually saying or doing what you're saying and doing? And it leads us to say, what's your agenda? What do you want out of this? Why are you talking to me about this? And if we're truly suspicious, that is, we start to judge what someone's behavior is, and we change our behavior based on someone else's intent, motive, and agenda. So you evaluating whether your motive matches your behavior is critical. You might be relying on someone else to do the heavy lifting and trying to do behavior that doesn't match your motive. So this is a good, you know, look at yourself, look at your communication, and evaluate where your intent comes into play. And when we've taken that good examination of our character, and that's honestly something we have to work on for our entire life, because people rub us wrong in different institutions, in different settings all the time. And we go through stuff, right? We go through life. So we're constantly growing and adapting. And when we say that we're committed to working on our character, the other part of this building trust in the job is the confidence. So you probably don't want the surgeon who's never done surgery before, right? You want someone who has the talent, they have the attitude, they have the knowledge, they have the skill and the style to be able to pull it off. And when you put those two together and something gets done, you can measure the results. And this is a great way to measure whether there was trust there or not, because often results happen. Maybe someone lands a big sales contract, for example. And then when you evaluate, how did they land it? What happened? Were there good character practices that came into play, or are they just a good salesperson? What was it? Was it just their skill, or was it also combined with their character? And this is like where we get the whole sleazy salesperson thing, right? We know that that person gets results, they can make the sales, but we don't really love the methodology of why they do it or how they do it. We don't really love the character piece connected to it, where we could feel tricked or deceived. So this is a key one when you're looking with your teams. You'll know whether you build trust with others and they build it with you when you look at this and say, hey, we're actually good at one aspect of this. And it could be character. It could be we're all really great people who do things above board, but we don't really know what we're doing. We don't actually have the skill to execute this, and we need to bring someone else in who has that skill, or we need to learn it ourselves. So finding out, is this at play, is best done after a task or during a task, saying, are we engaging both prongs, the character and the competence? If we don't, we end up paying a huge tax in our organization. And this is just like the social capital that we talked about earlier. It's not something you can measure on the books right away, but it will impact the books. If you don't have trust as a team and with your organization, your speed and efficiencies go way down, and it ends up costing the company more than you intended. So there's a invisible reward in having trust together. People produce more, they work more efficiently, and it ends up costing the business less. And you know what this feels like. You know when you've been on a team like this, where people are like, I would do anything for that manager. I will do anything to save this ship. And especially in the culture we're in right now, where businesses are being so impacted by the economic realities that you know whether you have trust with your team when everybody's going, we are going to save this, we are leaving no one behind. I heard a story just recently of a small company who decided they found out there were some layoffs coming, and they came back to the manager and they said, we will all take a pay cut and a cut in hours, just so that no one has to get laid off. We will sacrifice everybody to some degree so that we don't have to sacrifice somebody to 100% degree. That's a high trust organization where they say, we know our company has our best interest in mind, and we want to pitch in and we want to make it change. When you measure trust and distrust, it ends up doubling and tripling the costs and the time that it takes for production. And production is a big deal in your company. That's really your highest cost, is your human resource cost. So when we can up the trust on our teams, we produce speed or efficiency and ultimately end up reducing the overall costs to the organization. And if you're older than maybe 18, you probably already have this feeling where you're like, oh man, if I knew now what I knew, or if I knew then what I know now, it just changes how you build trust, because you realize it's so critical that every transaction you make with your coworkers is a deposit in and a withdrawal out. And this happens with colleagues, and this happens with customers. And when we're able to measure that, we're aware that there's actually a cost to doing business. There's a cost to working together, where it costs a part of our person, right? Time is actually a transactional thing where there's been a cost to it. You become where you realize, I really want to do that in ways that matter, in ways that make investments in other people and in my company. Recognizing that trust impacts us around the clock, every day, on the clock, off the clock. You know, your competitors are awake when you're asleep. They're doing stuff online while you're sleeping at night. And so building that trust with your team and trying to get that ripple effect into the market and into the society and into the culture, that can't happen on the big scale. That always has to happen on the bite-sized piece. Now, we have other webinars and topics that we cover that deal with more of that character part, or deal with the competence piece and shoring up skills in certain areas. But recognizing that, remembering where that first ripple is, right, in the self-trust. And so my challenge to you today, and I have one I've thrown out to myself, my challenge to you today is, what's the trust piece that you can build with yourself this week? What's something that you can do different? And it probably won't happen if you don't write it down. So you do need to jot it down when we go off air together here. But what is that piece where you can say, what's a way I build self-trust this week for the next 3 business days this week? What is the piece I can change to create that trust culture with myself? And then watch and see, how does that impact the people around us? Now, I want to give you 100 good ideas of what those could be, give you a place to start, but you know you. So you do you, and go ahead and build trust with your teams. I want to invite Jessica to join us again, and thank you all so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. I'm so amazed every time that you deliver a webinar. I'm just absolutely thrilled with the information that you deliver, and it's so amazing. And yes, please give Rochelle, Amy, a round of applause. She did a great job, and it's a pleasure having you back each and every time, especially for Tuesday Tidbit. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and again, remind everybody to check the website at www.wem, Interlake, INTRLAKE.ca. I'll put it in the box so that you'll have it when we leave today, and I hope to see you very soon. Thank you so much, participants, and thank you very much, Rochelle.